Hello and welcome to the Deep Track Podcast, an exploration of watches, trends, and culture with a few adventures along the way. I'm your host, Blake Bettner. This week, I'm happy to welcome Danny Milton to the podcast. Danny is the new Vice President of Content for Teddy Baldassarre, where he will be building out a new editorial team and editorial operation for that business. I will also be contributing some of my writing to their efforts there, so you can keep an eye out for that. You may recognize Danny's name from Hodinkee, where he recently served as the managing editor. In this episode, we talk a little bit about that move. We talk about Grand Seiko and a recent Grand Seiko event that they had. We talk a lot about the MoonSwatch. Danny, of course, has an affinity, a well-documented affinity for the MoonSwatch, so we talk about kind of the last few years, how that has evolved, and what kind of impact it has had on the collecting space as well as other brands around it. And for good measure, we talk about some of the movies that he's been watching recently. This is a really fun discussion, and I look forward to welcoming Danny on the podcast, hopefully again in the near future, and maybe we'll even get Teddy on to pick his brain a little bit about the watch industry as well. All right, with that out of the way, let's get into this week's episode with Danny Milton. Danny Milton, it's good to see you, man. Thanks for coming to the podcast today, dude.
Thanks for having me, Blake. It's exciting. I'm really, ever since you started this, I've been hoping to be able to get on. So I'm glad we could finally make it happen.
Dude, of course, anytime. I feel like every time that we start chatting about watches or something, it's like hours go by. You've had a lot going on in your life recently, which we can get into a little bit. But first, what are you wearing on your wrist today, Danny?
So I am wearing a Grand Seiko. People might remember this one. This is the blue sort of Hodinkee GMT limited edition.
Yeah.
From I want to say 2021. So earlier on in my time there, but one of those watches where like I remember how we put the campaign together. I remember who shot it. It was actually shot in shout out to my guy Davey, who was one of our video producers, was shot in his apartment. You know, in COVID,
nice.
you had to get creative with how we did things. Put together a really fun campaign for it, and it's like a watch has some nice backstory for me, and was sort of the last watch I picked up when I left. Is sort of a nice memory of my time, which is sort of foreshadowing into maybe some other stuff.
Sure. We'll get into maybe a little bit of that. I really like that watch and how it turned out. The blue looks really nice, and there's like a, I don't know, it's like a grays or something that are kind of accent colors.
And it's all very matte.
Yeah.
Everything is matte and brushed. You know, where a lot of GS has like ornate dial texture or it's very lacquered, this thing is a flat, very vivid blue, and the accent colors are like they have a textured sort of gray coloration, and the hands have like an intense brushing, like in a way that's I really, really like. It's the kind of watch you just kind of catch yourself looking at for minutes on end.
Yeah, it's Grand Seiko's an interesting beast to me. Well, I'll do a wrist check, and then maybe we can talk more about Grand Seiko, because I know you just did something with them last week. I'm wearing an Omega Speedmaster today, just the basic steel, the 3861.
On bracelet or
on the bracelet. I like this bracelet a lot, and I know they
too.
made a newer version with the quick adjust type system, but. You know, I don't know, but for me, like if I can get it to fit just the way that I like, then I don't really mind that so much. And honestly, I prefer a clasp that is more like low profile and comfortable. We were talking about it with the Ingenieur a little bit too. You know, I would rather have that kind of like sleek, comfortable clasp and just try and get it to fit like just right. But I know that quick adjustments are like all the rage.
They are. I feel like it's more all the rage of like a point of contention when you're thinking about whether or not you like a watch or not. But in practice, I'm with you. I mean, I came, you know, along with watches with the older, you know, Rolex clasps or any watch that we ever had. It was like, it was fine. It all works fine. You get that fit and it's fine. You only think about changing the watch for the heat if like you have the capability, but I didn't. And most watches I own don't, to be honest with you. And hot take, some of them have them, and it's pretty inelegant. And if I did open it up, I wouldn't want. I don't like the way it looks.
Yeah, that's true, and it introduces a lot of like new moving parts. So there's potential different like kind of fail points, or there are things to jam up. You know, I guess it's nice when it's there and it's done well. But I've never like seen a watch that I really like and thought, oh, it doesn't have a quick adjust. Forget that kind of a situation, right? It's just kind of like a bonus if it's there and it works. but it's got to work well. So you are just getting off of a trip over to Cleveland, which, and I understand this turned it into a little bit of an adventure for you
It did.
in getting home. But you had you described it as kind of like a GS9 type event. So tell me about the situation there in Cleveland with this Grand Seiko event.
Yeah. So, I just started over with the crew at Teddy and getting together now, which is super fun. And one of the first things that I knew was happening coming aboard was there was going to be this big event between Grand Seiko and the Teddy crew. It was sort of like a Teddy Grand Seiko GS9 kind of event. So sort of calling upon the same type of audience and crowd, sort of like I guess you would say there's a cult fan like audience for Grand Seiko, and so
Yeah.
they turn out for this sort of thing. So part of my trip to Cleveland, the main anchor point of that trip was this big event. We rented out this huge space near the Teddy store in Cleveland, and man, hundreds of people showed up to this thing.
Oh,
Obviously, there were
nice.
Grand Seiko representatives. You had one of the master watchmakers from Japan flew in, a gentleman by the name of Suzuki-san. He did an entire presentation of the assembling of a GS movement.
Yeah.
Our good friend Joe Kirk was there, who was sort of leading kind of that presentation. And for us who are exposed to things like this all the time, it was still incredible. But you have to think about those who basically read and watch our things from afar and got to see that, get to really have this like tangible connection to
Yeah.
the Japanese craftsmanship, like right in front of them. They could meet the
Yeah.
watchmaker. He was mingling with the crowd, and this was a 10-hour event. I kid you not.
Whoa.
10 hours.
Wow.
There were two sessions for the watchmaking. There was sort of like a panel conversation between Joe and Teddy. I was mixing it up with a lot of people who I've come across and seen sort of in my adventures in watches, and some people who I'd never met before. And something interesting that I noticed was like, I would say 85 to 90% of the people who attended were, I was hoping to meet a lot of Clevelanders,
Hmm.
a lot of them were from, almost all of them out of town.
Really?
One guy
Okay.
drove 20 hours from Denver.
Whoa.
I met a group of guys. I don't, you may have heard of these. Google has like a watch group within the Google ranks. They've been known to do like a lot of internal limited
Yeah.
editions for themselves. There's some famous ones out there. Same with like Meta and Facebook. So
Yep.
a
Yep.
group of three of those dudes flew over from the Bay Area. It's just it was insane how many people, and a lot of New York people. It was cool.
Jeez, that's really cool. And what were your thoughts on I was going to ask you to or say Cleveland can show up for this kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Hopefully some of the local people there
Oh no,
were
they
at
did. There were
least
there were
curious enough, right?
definitely some.
So your thoughts on Cleveland? What do you think?
I have I said this a lot when I was there, and this is like not me just trying to be like, oh, I'm used to. So I used to live in Pittsburgh, which is not far from Cleveland, so I'm used to sort of that part of the U.S. Sort
Okay.
of like more of a. And I also lived in Baltimore for some time, so blue collar industrial type cities that sort of had a hand in the foundation of the United States
Sure.
industrial machine in some ways. I have an affinity toward. And Cleveland is fantastic. It's the kind of town where there's a lot of city pride. Um, there's some seriously good food, and I like that it just has a different vibe to it. It's something I experienced too when Hodinkee had the whole Crown and Caliber thing, getting to go to Atlanta a bit. To get outside of the New York sort of coastal New York, LA,
Hmm.
you just go from JFK to Europe. It's like there's other parts of here and other pockets of
Yeah.
like serious watch enthusiasm.
Yeah.
Um, and what I really liked about it was, talking to Teddy too, is like he's really kind of gotten behind the city himself, and like I planted the roots there. And you've seen that what the reaction was. It's now like, judging by this GS event, like there's almost like a pilgrimage kind of aspect to it,
Mm.
where it's like, and creating a destination there is fantastic, but also, the 15 to 20% of the locals that I did meet were amazing. Just like serious
Yeah.
watch people, the type of enthusiasts that really appreciate brands like Glashütte Original, like they're like deep, they go
Mhm.
deep on this stuff.
Yeah. Well, it's good to hear. That's the Midwest, right? That's
They call it the Midwest. So if they're calling
okay.
it that,
It's like the
I'd
Mideast
probably say, yeah, I'd probably say like
something.
once you get into Chicago, Indiana, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
really talking Midwest, but they were referring it to as the Midwest. So
Okay.
I'll
Okay.
take their word for it.
It's a state of mind, I
Yeah.
suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Midwest is a
there's
state of mind.
it's great being out there. I love being in cities like that. And yeah, totally agree on the food scenes at some of these cities. You feel like a lot of these great chefs are like, I'm not gonna do this high risk, high cost type situation in a place like New York when I can come into St. Louis or Milwaukee or Cleveland or something and open these great restaurants, and you find tons of them. I know it's certainly the case over in St. Louis, and uh, there's a lot to discover and really enjoy and appreciate in these places. So it's not like the coastal people sit here and go scoff at.
Yeah, we had an amazing dinner one of the nights at a place that specialized in poutine, pierogies, and corn dogs.
Poutine,
And
pierogi, and corn dogs. Okay,
yeah, I mean, if you
that's
can't appreciate that, you can't appreciate food. I mean, that is a trio of items that I never expected to see on a single menu, and I tried all three because you
and you
have
tried
to.
all three and you
You
made it
have
out
to.
the other end just
Yeah, I
fine.
made it out the other end. Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. I survived. I'm here to talk to you today.
yeah. And getting back, you survived the drive as well. You missed the flight,
Well,
so
I didn't miss the flight. The flight missed me. I mean,
oh,
what
the
happened
flight
was,
missed you. Okay, I
yeah,
like that way of putting
I,
it. All
I,
right.
I, I was there. I was ready to go. I had a 10 o'clock flight out of Cleveland on a nice Sunday morning. It was my dog's birthday, which I know may not mean a lot to a lot of people, but it meant a lot to my wife and to
Okay.
me.
Okay.
And
All right.
I'm looking at my watch. It's like, I'm at the airport at 9:30, and right as I'm crossing through security, I see the big board change from delayed 40 minutes to delayed 7 hours.
Ooh,
For a flight, by the way, that airtime is 45 minutes
yeah.
all in. You basically
Yeah.
take off and you land. So I
Yeah.
don't I don't know how that works, but I made the quick decision to get in a rental car and make a 6 hour
Yeah.
drive home.
Yeah.
And I'll say I made it home 3 hours before that flight ever took off. So
There you go.
I
All
felt good
right.
about my decision.
Wise decision there then.
Yeah.
All right, so let's take a step back. You mentioned that you recently are starting to work with Teddy Baldassarre. If
Yep.
you're not familiar, who is a well, yes, what is this? This is a an authorized retail presence, and they also are editorial wing, which is where guys like you and I come in. so
Exactly.
so you have made the move over there to help kind of lead the charge in shaping what the editorial part of this business could look like moving ahead. So tell me about making this move. Is it kind of any ideas that you have or what you think that will look like end up looking like kind of in the long run over there at Teddy?
Yeah, look, I mean, like Teddy has done, I guess, over the last 7 years or so, such an amazing job growing what was essentially a solo YouTube presence. And I think the YouTube watch space can't be understated these days. I mean, it is like a subgenre of watch content all on his own,
Mm-hmm.
all on its own. I think Teddy really emerged as an early voice in sort of the core YouTube watch enthusiast scene, and was able to quickly turn that into a serious retail operation,
Yeah.
bringing in a ton of brands, really scaling it out. I would say, joining this team has been super exciting because it's a small team, but it's a mighty team, and it's a
Mm.
team of people that work really hard. And I think that the vision here, I'm coming on as sort of the quote unquote vice president of content to really expand um, that enthusiast core tenet of the brand. I think editorial plays an important role in that. And you think about where I've been, at Hodinkee, where I think it was editorial first and then leaned into that sort of commercial end.
Mm-hmm.
I think Teddy's been having sort of two tracks going simultaneously. He's developed a very trustworthy voice, a really loyal audience, and was able to, at the same moment, start that retail arm. And I kind of define it as sort of like the ultimate convenience. You're able to consume watch content. You're able to learn about
Yeah.
watches. I think a lot of his audience is sort of the up and coming, maybe, the coveted television demographic of the 18 to 24, or whatever you want to call
Yeah.
it. But like,
Yeah.
the young watch enthusiast demographic that's learning through him and going on a watch journey, so to speak. But I think the that's one component, and a component that I'm really excited about is sort of like really scaling out written editorial, a diversification of content, period, and having the website be a place where you come to get your fix. You in addition to the video consumption. I think that's really important. I think there is an opening for that. I think that the cyclical nature of watches, I think it's just ready for a fresh new space. I think that Teddy has created a more a more than serious foundation of an audience that is ready for it.
Hmm.
And so I think the timing was really nice for me to come in, and then I immediately the moment that I sort of made that decision to go from honestly a dream career of mine over at Hodinkee, and I just have to say that working with the likes of Ben Clymer and James Stacy and everybody I worked with in the past, from Stephen, Cole, John, Cara, Logan, Nick Marino, Joe Thompson. I mean, there was a ton of people there that I have to give shout outs to. And it was just incredible. I learned a lot. And, I made a lot of friends like you along the
Yeah.
way around the world. And so the moment that I made this decision, you were probably the first person I called. I was like, we got to work together. We got to figure this out.
Yeah, and it's true. It's a small world, obviously, that you get into, and all of us that have worked for other publications, we all become friends. And we all kind of appreciate each other for different ways, and obviously, there's other familiar faces over at Teddy that have already been there. Guys like
Yes,
Mark Bernardo, like long time watch
absolutely.
industry people
Yep.
that are wealth of knowledge, of course. So it's exciting to see this kind of form up and take shape. With people that I've really enjoyed developing relationships with over the past few years. So I'm really excited to see how this develops and evolves. And I'm happy to have the chance to play any small part in kind of bringing it along and where you guys are hoping to take it. You mentioned something that I thought was interesting, and I think looking back over the past 5 or 6 years, this kind of media landscape has shifted a little bit, and I think there are kind of still the stalwarts that people including you and I kind of love and appreciate for different reasons, and then there's this kind of new generation of enthusiasts that has come into the space that is maybe used to. It's more like, I don't want to say fractured, but maybe kind of like splintered off, where they find kind of like these smaller communities of people who kind of talk about what they like talking about, or it's less kind of broad strokes and more people kind of find their own places and spots, whether it's the forums or whether it's like a YouTube channel or a Slack channel or something like that. And it's less, well, everybody just goes to these few big publications and that's that. Like, you can find droves of new enthusiasts in all kinds of different spaces, and I've been really surprised, and especially as I've kind of tried to get into the YouTube space just relatively recently, that a lot of people that I've interacted with there, that's where they talk about watches and
And
consume
they
watch
really
content.
talk about it there. I mean, I
And
was
it's
shocked.
yeah, it's and they
Shocked.
they might not even really spend much time on
No.
yeah, on the websites reading the stories. So I've been really surprised, and honestly, it's been great to connect and engage with some of these people in a
Yeah.
different kind of way. So I don't know if that's something that you've noticed or that you see where people are kind of coming into this space in different
You,
avenues.
you know where I noticed it a lot is like, our good friend James Stacy. I mean, the Gray NATO, they almost operate entirely within like a Slack universe. And that
Yeah,
is like seriously devoted fans, and it gives you a front row seat to uh the voices that you want to hear, and you get to
yeah,
interact with them. Think of I don't know if you follow, but like Watches of Espionage. I mean, where did that come from? And then
yeah,
suddenly it's like it's a
yeah,
real thing. You want to talk about like esoteric corners of enthusiasm? That's like a niche within a niche.
yeah, yeah,
And,
exactly.
and I, sort of dabbled initially into the watches and movies sphere, and then that became like a small part of my life too. It turned into
Hmm.
like working directly with television shows and movies, and focusing in on literally like the marriage of a watch and a production. And it's
Yeah.
like there's all and I found that there are fans who kind of would only consume my watching movies content for a while.
Hmm.
And so I think people are looking for what you're saying, which is like, and with the such a crazy statement, what the internet provides you is like exposure to like even the most granular version of what it is you're looking for. There's somebody out there that's an authority on it. And
Yeah.
if they aren't, then there's the ability to create a community around it. Even if
Yeah.
there's no like central authoritative voice, at least you can talk to people that like the same stuff you do. And to your point, like YouTube, at the very least, you're consuming the content, but in that comment section, sometimes I'm seeing like hundreds, thousands of comments. And even when I was at Hodinkee, some of them would have no idea that this was an extension of another thing.
Yeah.
That there was a YouTube channel that was an extension of an editorial platform. And even on Instagram, sometimes we'd post a photo, and I think some people only followed Hodinkee as an Instagram account. Like that was
Mm-hmm.
that was how they saw it. So there's always, I find that a very fascinating thing. I think as someone who's now hear Teddy thinking about how to engage in the content space, more
Yeah.
strategically. Those thoughts make me think more about how you operate within every channel. Like every channel almost has to act as its own thing, and you
Yeah.
can't assume that someone knows that there are other components to it.
And the people that are there might be motivated by entirely different things, especially these days. I certainly see a lot of people coming into this that are inspired by the looks, like the fashion, the style element to it. And they see them on these celebrities and they're really interested in that part of it, which is great. And they might not consider themselves like a watch nerd or anything or give much thought to like the finishing of a bridge or something like that, which is totally fine. And they have their other thing, like how the way that they appreciate these things is just kind of coming from a different approach. And then you've got the guys that are kind of like totally nerding out about, the watches espionage type stuff. And then,
Yeah.
the gray NATO, like the adventure focus type stuff. So you have all of these cohorts kind of all centered around ostensibly something that is like totally redundant these days and kind of ridiculous, but it spawned all of these kind of passionate groups of enthusiasts that are around it, and how they want to engage with the space, I suppose, is like kind of evolving because of this, and largely as a result of how places like Hodinkee have covered this industry, and with people like Bryn and Malika coming into the space and talking about this in a different way than like how guys like you or I might, which is why I appreciate people like them to kind of bring a different perspective into this, and I think that's a really ultimately healthy thing for the space overall. Overall.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think some of the more stalwart brands are almost like the baseline. They provide you a place to see sort of the full gamut of what you can experience, and then you pull what you like out of it. And I think what everyone ultimately is looking for is little pockets of communities, because that's what they
Yeah.
really want. That's why you experience this at Worn and Wound, like these meetups, these community events. Like they end up being the most fulfilling part of the whole experience, because you deal with comment sections, you deal with avatars, you deal with handles, and then you meet people.
Hmm.
And you realize that some of them felt like you were unapproachable, like you were a distant figure, and to get to meet you is so cool, and to get to just like talk about the stuff that they would talk about with
Yeah.
their buddies,
Yeah.
because we're all into this thing because we love watches, we love whatever subgenre of watches we love, and we talk about it with the stranger just as fast as we talk about it with our best friend or our family.
Yeah, exactly. And there are certain watches, maybe moments, that kind of like unite all of these different elements, and it becomes kind of like a firestorm of of thoughts. And I think there's a watch that you have a great deal of experience around, this MoonSwatch craze,
Yeah.
supposedly is one of those things. A moment, a watch, a whatever collaboration that has done that. It's been kind of a lightning rod, and every single one of these cohorts that we've talked about all has seemingly their own kind of thoughts on this. Now in hindsight, it's been what, a few years since we initially saw this collaboration, and you were kind of, I think, one of the early ones kind of seriously covering this, and have done so ever since. How do you think that this has evolved from those early days, and do you think it still like carries as much of an impact, and has there been an impact on other parts of the industry around it because of this?
I don't know why I did from the beginning, but I remember the mystique, and this is like a purely like inside baseball moment here, but the mystique around the launch, and knowing that I had access to get information beforehand, typically, and knowing that
Sure.
information at that moment was being kept more secretive than usual,
Hmm.
sort of put my investigative journalistic hat on. I was like, I gotta chase this down.
Yeah.
Um, so maybe that was like what started my fire. But then when I saw the watches, it like instantly clicked with me. I'd never and ever seen anything like that. And I think nobody had. I
Yeah.
mean, it was a really audacious move to take something as iconic as a Speedmaster and transpose it into something sub $300,
Hmm.
combine it with a swatch. And look, I spend a lot of time in Europe. Um, my wife is from Poland. We're there all the time. Like swatch is a big deal globally. Like it really is. And I know that there's not quite the same prevalence of swatch boutiques in the U.S. as there probably is in every single urban center of Europe, and probably other parts of the globe too. But seeing the line around the Times Square boutique in New York, I don't know where these people came from. I don't
Yeah.
know how they got there. I don't know what they read, which tipped them off to get in line. I don't have my finger on the pulse of hype culture, but I can tell you that of the 3,000 people I encountered, there wasn't like a ton of watch enthusiasts, and like, of course, like people were out there for nefarious reasons, trying to make a quick buck by whatever.
Hmm.
But that's its own bucket. But for the most part, there's a lot of young people that just got really excited, and they really. I went in the store and people were clapping, and it was like an iPhone launch in 2007.
Yeah. Yeah.
Coming out of the store and like holding it up in the air, and the whole crowd is cheering for you.
Yeah.
Um, and look, over the past 2 years since it launched, we had that, I think, a little rough period of the mission to moonshine gold moment where it was just like, from an outside perspective, seemed like a weird move. They still sold out of every single one, so that's saying something.
Sure.
But I will tell you that and I live in the Washington D.C. area, and there's not a Swatch store within 150 miles in any direction of where I am, and I see now, second to Apple Watch, I see MoonSwatch.
You see
And
the
I
moon
think
swatch,
that
yeah.
what I have appreciated so much about the MoonSwatch is the way that it has permeated real culture, people who may not even be into watches. And I think that you could make the argument that the Apple Watch and the smartwatch is the modern day quartz watch to mechanical watches.
Hmm.
And I know that the MoonSwatch isn't a mechanical watch, but I think now what you want is the analog watch. You just want the watch to
The analog
persist.
experience,
Yeah,
yeah.
you
Yeah.
want that to persist. And I've seen the MoonSwatch, punch down on the Apple Watch a little bit, and it's been very, very interesting to see the analog watch sort of like reemerge. And I think that Swatch has a very I like seeing the historical context, and I felt like we were living through a moment in the watch industry. I still feel like we are. I think the latest releases, the Mission on Earth, the one like the Ultraman esque model,
Yeah.
like that's a hot watch.
Yeah.
Sorry, it
They're
is.
great looking. Yeah.
Um,
And there's two Snoopy ones I thought were both real
yeah, I
sharp and
picked. I
introduced
got.
a
Yep.
unique take on that complication, I suppose. So,
Yeah, I'm not really. I think everyone's still a bit confused on like the actual like use case of that complication. However, it's pretty.
yeah.
Snoopy's cool, and
Yeah.
it's $280 to $300.
Yeah. Do you think that do you think how different do you think this would have been had they, a month later made it available online and all subsequent versions made available online? I know it's kind of like one of the most contentious elements of
Yeah,
this. If you're gonna make a watch like this, kind of great. Now people will have access to a Speedmaster that otherwise maybe would not be spending, six, seven, $8,000 on one, which is great. And if it opens that watch up to more people, but at the same time kind of restricting it down to people who can show up at one of these things or pay aftermarket for it. Do you think it was the right call, like in the long haul, to keep it exclusively available in physical retail locations?
I do. And I'll try to explain it the best that I can, because it's not like when you get to a boutique, they're impossible to buy anymore. If you were actually to walk in, almost every single one will now be there.
Yeah.
If there was a time where that wasn't the case, but that's very much the case now. And recently I went with my wife on a trip to Madrid, and I remember walking by a Swatch store and thinking, like, it would feel really special if we picked one of those up. It wouldn't be like walking by a much more expensive boutique and having to think about if you're about to drop $5,000 and have this, like, but it was the
Yeah.
memory of the trip. You like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
But I would feel like not too dissimilar with my $300 purchase at the Swatch store and be like, I got this in this city on this trip. And so I think that there's a bit of it's old school.
Yeah.
It's taking a core uh commercial strategy of watches that until maybe the last 8 years, didn't exist, which was like, if you want to go buy a watch, you go buy it in a boutique.
Hmm.
There's some luxury brands out there. I think of like Goyard, the leather goods brand. It's like they don't have an online retail presence, and that's starting to eat into Louis Vuitton, market share, about the wallets, the tote bags, the whatever.
Hmm. Yeah.
I don't know. I think I attribute a lot of this to a vocal minority.
Okay. Okay. Did you pick one up in Madrid?
I didn't, but that's only because I
Okay.
have two. I
Okay.
have
Okay.
two already,
Okay.
and I'm almost glad I didn't, because I think I'm going to spring for the Ultraman at some point.
Okay. Okay, yeah, I like that version of it as as well. And I think broadly speaking, these are generally available not too far from their MSRP pricing on places like StockX or the
Yeah, I think
forums and
someone
stuff
told me
like
they got
that.
one for like $330, which is like a $30 premium over that. So
Yeah,
it's like at the end of the day, I
yeah,
think the market's course corrected and understood like you can't upcharge people too much. And then to the other question you asked, which I didn't get to, was like I think that the you're seeing the broader watch industry respond a little bit. I know that Tag Heuer doesn't want this to be connected with the MoonSwatch, but the Kith Heuer F1,
yeah,
yes, they always had that in their back pocket because the F1, the Formula One
yeah,
watches always existed. They were always plastic, but the timing, you have to think that it had an impact.
yeah,
And I
yeah,
do think, and who knows what the future holds, that was that watch released at a $400 price point, it would eat a lot into the MoonSwatch market share,
yeah,
a
yeah.
ton.
Yeah. Do you think that them doing that with the Kith collaboration kind of locks them out of doing a just a regular production version of that
No,
watch?
no way. They
Or
could
do you like
totally do it.
surely that's around the corner because they weren't making that many of those altogether. And that's a watch that has to sell. That's a volume play, right?
They can app. They should. If they aren't thinking that, then I would not be surprised to see that happen.
Yeah, I feel like it's gotta. And then the Kith will be like the cool one to have in
Right,
10
and
years or
that's
whatever.
fine. And I'm sure that they'll restrict the colorways, so there'll be like certain colorways that were Kith only, and
Yeah. Yeah.
but it's
Yeah.
it should
So
happen, and I'll probably pick one up, and I'm hoping it'll be slightly less without
yeah.
the Kith branding on it.
Yeah. Yeah, no kidding. Um, so to shift gears here a little bit and maybe go on the slightly opposite direction, just because we touched on it a little bit earlier, the Grand Seiko stuff. There's just a few thoughts that I wanted to get out on that because you mentioned the kind of the brush surfaces and stuff like that of the
Yeah,
watch that's on your wrist, and this is a brand that I've always had kind of a hard time placing just internally in my mind about like what they are.
yep,
They kind of like live between genres and they are just kind of like their own thing. I know that in the last few years we've seen this the kind of like clear cut genres be, there's this more gray area between these now. And I think a lot of brands, you hear the word go anywhere, do anything type stuff. And you want, brands that make watches that, will fill every aspect of your life or be usable in most aspects of your life with the realization that not many of us are pilots and scuba divers and whatever, right? uh, and I think Grand Seiko kind of lives in these interesting, like there's certainly formal elements to them,
yeah,
but they make the kind of sportier watches and they have these kind of rules that they follow around this. But I always have a hard time. They don't really seem to follow the kind of staple archetypes of these genres that we think about. They kind of like play by their own rules. But at the same time, like I would also love to see a Grand Seiko with like a fully brushed case in the Evolution 9 collection like they get really close in some ways, but then there's always something that kind of pushes it into like, well, something about this just doesn't feel like it's up my alley. And I don't
yeah.
know if yeah, I've tried to kind of like bug Joe Kirk about this and they kind of fall back on these rules that they have around these collections and I'm like, okay, well, what
I,
like people like me who like a sub or an explorer or something like
sure.
that, where's our Grand Seiko?
And they'll tell you that it's there, and I think that there's an aesthetic that you'd have to get on board with for the diver series. But I think what you're more getting at is like, where is that core tool watch?
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
I think they might
exactly.
argue with you that it might be in a different brand altogether in some respects.
Hmm.
Because like the watch that I have, it's definitely a go anywhere, but it is not a do anything. It's a
Yeah,
do some things.
sure.
Like the thing about this watch that I thought about very, consciously was like 30 meters of water resistance scares me. Like that's I don't care about a quick adjust clasps. Water resistance, I generally is like I don't even care if I'm not a diver. I just like to have it. But
Yeah,
in the case of this watch, it brought to me a few things that I wish was in more Grand Seikos, which fully brushed
yeah,
oyster style bracelet,
yes,
three
yeah,
link classic. That is what's on this, and it's almost like it reminds me of my Explorer.
yeah,
Um, matte dial. You don't see that very often.
yeah,
But what I think Grand Seiko is doing is it has to, and it's a thing that other brands aren't doing. It's committing to its like core tenets, and it's not backing off of it. because when you turn a Grand Seiko over and you really look at the movements inside, I know it's like cliche, but I looked at enough Grand Seikos this past weekend to drive the point home. It's like looking at some. You might walk into a Patek Philippe boutique and look at the movement back there, and you get the same feel, but you're not paying the same money.
Yeah.
And the vertical integration of Grand Seiko, the Japanese mastery of materials, the fact that like if you were to tell somebody that like every dial component on your watch was hand finished, like that is not something that you would attach to go anywhere, do anything aesthetic.
Yeah.
And even though some of their watches are 100 meters water resistant, whatever, they just sort of operate in this really interesting space where the reason they're such a niche audience is you have to be bought into the Japanese thing. And I mean that in like the most positive way possible. It's like there are like Japanophiles out there that love it, and they're there for like the knife work. They're there for like the attention to collecting things and learning about them and learning every single thing you possibly can, and just appreciating the craftsmanship and the fact that they're able to put that in watches and not price gouge you in the process. Is pretty amazing. And the dials that they do, if not handled the way that they do it, would come across as real kitschy. You know?
Yeah, that's true, and you see that because I think a lot of the rise in popularity of Grand Seiko for things like their dials, I think you see other brands try to capture in a lot of ways, and it doesn't quite work.
No, it doesn't land.
One of my favorite watches that I saw this year at Watches of Wonders was there. It's a time only, so they took the date off there, but it still has that beautiful dial. And the reference escapes me at the moment, but I was really excited to see these because they generally do these really stunning dials and then put like a frame date window on there, and I'm like, just let the dial like sing on its own, and they did it, and this was like one of my favorite ones, and they did that. The click on the back that's like the shape of the bird, and they pass it around, had you wind it so you could really appreciate it. Like those are the little things that you can't get in a picture or a video. Like you just have to experience it. You
and
just
like
with
the Kodo as well. I mean, that watch is you look at that in person, you're just like, oh my, like, even if that's not your bag at all, like because that is a very specific aesthetic. And it just goes to show you that they're really good at navigating through just nailing that.
It's like their whole ethos kind of come to life, and it's hard to have that watch in your hand or on your wrist and not like have your jaw hit the floor, like whatever your thought. Like it's an absolutely stunning work of art. We'll leave links to all the stuff that we're talking about down below, so you can check it out with some more of the details. And we've covered all these watches for the most part that we've talked about today. The Grand Seiko is an interesting discussion that I like having, and maybe we could save a broader discussion on that for another day. Before we close, what kind of movies are you watching these days?
Oh, interesting. Well, I finally got around to watching Poor Things, which I sort of put off for a while, and I watched it because the film Kinds of Kindness just dropped, which is the latest from the same director of that movie. And I've got to say, like, talk about some dynamic visuals in film. This was not a director that I've really followed. I honestly have not. I never saw The Favorite. I hadn't seen like some of his other stuff, and I'm pretty blown away by it. But also, I'm a big repeat movie watcher, and sometimes when I see some movies, I end up watching them a few times. You know what movie it's like the only blockbuster that really came out this year was Dune Part 2.
Yeah.
And I was able to go to see the premiere in New York, and I remember sitting down and watching it and realizing that I don't really remember what happened in the first film, and I hadn't read the book. But it was a great movie, and I went home and I watched the first movie again, and then suddenly like the whole thing clicked, and I was like, wow, the first movie is fantastic. I gotta go watch the second one again, and then I gotta watch, like you end up in this like you feel like you're a 12-year-old kid again, getting in love with Star Wars and just sort of like going back and forth. But then the Dune 2 thing, Hamilton actually figured out a way to create again like an in-movie prop that isn't quite a watch but is in the film. So for folks like me who just like eat that stuff up, where I'm just like, I love when a brand like Hamilton, which has such a good history of watches and movies, from the Interstellar to Tenet to 2001: A Space Odyssey, Men in Black, whatever, was
Predators.
Consulted. Yeah, sure, but consulted to make not a watch. They just want, like, we want a wrist device. Can you make that for us?
Yeah.
And then of course they make their own limited edition watch on the other end for retail, but that's cool movie making. For me, that speaks to Denis Villeneuve, the director, that speaks to the prop master, that we're like, we could have the art department just do something, but watch brands know how to make wrist stuff.
Yeah.
So let's have them do it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's cool, and I know that you say that, and if you're listening to this, you've probably heard that before, that Hamilton has like this connection with it. But like, I promise you, it's way deeper than you think.
Yes,
It
it's way
goes way,
deeper.
way back, and there are tons and tons of examples of this. Yeah, I really enjoyed
James Bond, the Pulsar. I mean, come on. Yeah.
Pulsar, of course. Yes. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, maybe it'd be fun to do like the kind of most I don't know, obscure Hamilton references that we
Yeah,
can
the
find in
Hamilton
films or something.
references that will convince you that Hamilton's bona fides are legit.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
something like that. Yeah.
Exactly. Uh, yeah, I was I really enjoyed Dune, both one and two, and I feel like I watched it again like almost immediately after I had
Yep.
seen it, and in one thing that deepened my enjoyment out of it, maybe this is a weird thing to say, but it was the same thing with Tenet, and the movie really clicked for me when I did this, is turn the subtitles on so I could read
Yes.
what was happening,
Yes.
which I know is like kind of lame and it takes you out of some of the visuals, but like I can follow things that I otherwise are subtle or just kind of missed or whatever. In the movie, it made so much more sense to me. In the movie, Tenet was like a whole different movie, and
I
I
saw it
liked
in
it.
cinemas with Cole Pennington, by the way. We walked out of the theater and we were like, I'm not entirely sure what we just watched, because I couldn't
Yeah,
hear half of what they said. And I
yeah,
did the
yeah.
exact same thing you did.
And it's a tough movie to follow, even if you
Yeah,
could.
exactly.
It's like I think it takes a couple times watching, but I appreciated it more after I watched that. And it was the same with the Dunes, which have it's a huge story that they're telling, but there's also like deeply personal things going on. So like how they intertwine these things, I think is really interesting. But yes, I'm glad that you said that about the Dune, because it is like it's I know it's based on a book, but it feels like something like wholly different than what we've been
It
used to
does.
seeing in the cinema like for the past whatever many years.
I
And I
like a
think
movie that rewards multiple viewings, because when you're watching a movie for the first time, your brain is doing so much work. And once you have that like baseline second viewing, you get to just sit back and relax and let all that extra stuff just like wash over you. And you
yeah
really get to deepen your experience. That's what I like about Tenet. I don't even know if I loved it the first time, but then it became like a movie I really, really enjoy. And I can watch it so many times because it's just like every time there's something new, and
yeah
it
yeah.
just deepens your appreciation for it. And
It's just
Dune is
like
no different.
it's just like the Big Lebowski in that regard.
Yes.
Exactly. Exactly.
Market zero, you
I had
know?
to I had to throw that in there. Of course. Do you get into video games at all?
I'm not a huge video game guy, to be honest with you. I know a lot of people are surprised because I feel like that comes with like media consumption writ
Like
large. But
yeah.
I was more of like I was, and my wife and I we're kind of old school. Like we both grew up playing like Crash Bandicoot on PS1,
Yeah.
way back when, and like
Yeah.
that stuff. Like when they sort of Taylor Swift themselves and remastered all the games and
Yeah.
re-released,
Yeah. Yeah.
Crash's version of every Crash Bandicoot.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so like, but man, my wife will get like every diamond, every like she'll 150% complete like every
Nice.
level of the game.
Uh,
She's much better than I am.
nice.
But
I
that's
love
where
it.
my wheelhouse is, old school.
Well, shout out to Kaisa,
Kasha, yeah.
Kasha. Okay,
Yep.
for that one. I only asked because I feel like there's a lot of great stories being told in the video
Oh
game
yeah.
genre that I can see starting to be like brought over into
You're
the
seeing
TV
so
and
many
film space. So
adaptations now, right? And you're
yeah,
seeing this. There's like multiple. What is Fallout's one of them? The
yeah,
Last of
Fallout.
Us is
Yeah,
another one.
yeah, both brilliantly done. I think so. I'm
Shout out to
excited to
the Mortal
see.
Kombat movies. Those
Nailed it, of course, of
some of the
course.
best.
Well, Danny, I really appreciate your time today. We will have to do this again sometime
For
soon.
sure.
Maybe
Yes.
once a month we can just chat about
Would
whatever the
love
new
to.
releases are, and stuff like that. Maybe we get Teddy on one of these at
Yeah.
some point and chat with him. Maybe we get Zach Kazan on one of these and nerd out about movies
My
and stuff
guy.
like that as
Shout out
well.
to Zach
So
Kazan.
shout out to to Kazan. And again, we'll leave links to all this stuff down below, as well as where you can go and find more of Danny on Instagram, on Teddy, on all that stuff. So keep an eye out for him there, and maybe we'll see your face in some videos sometime soon over on Teddy, right?
Sounds good to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. All right. Well, that will do it for this week's episode. I appreciate you for tuning in. Again, you can find links to everything that we've just talked about in today's episode down below. That'll do it for this week. Thanks again for tuning in, and until next time, take care.